Good afternoon, everyone. Please take a seat. Welcome to our brown bag. Just going to wait a few seconds until some folks come in and getting settled. I'm the Executive Director of the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council. We call it NYMTC, for those of you that are not regulars here. We appreciate your presence here today, those of you that are physically here, and those of you that are joining us online. It's another brown bag session for us. It's part of our Regional Trend Series. This is intended to provide the public with a front row seat to hear more about how current needs, how current trends and developments are shaping the future of our regional transportation system. In our current regional transportation plan, which we call it Plan 2045, hopefully a lot of you have seen our plan. We delve into some of the developing trends or what we call drivers of change that are impacting the transportation system, not just in New York City, not just in this region, but all over the world. We're looking at innovative trends. We're looking at technologies that are really shaping how transportation is evolving, throughout the world. So today with us, we have Mr. Jason Post. He is the Director of Public Policy and Communications for Uber Technologies. Mr. Post will discuss Uber's perspective on how future technology can be used to address some of the major transportation issues affecting major cities throughout the world. There will be an opportunity for questions following the presentations. For those of you online, please type in your questions, and we hope to address all of your questions at the end of the session. So now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Jason Post.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's very good to be at NYMTC. Thank you so much for hosting me. I'm going to run through some slides that talk about Uber and its impact on cities with a focus on New York, and then I want to leave a lot of time for your questions because I think often that is the most engaging part or the most useful thing is what your questions are. But before we get to that, I do want to frame some of what Uber is doing through the following slides. And we're going to talk about partnerships with cities and transit agencies around the world, and then a data sharing tool we've developed called Uber Movement, and then more on land use, off-street parking, and car storage. So Uber, as introduction, is a app that connects riders and drivers. We operate a technology platform that connects people that have money and need a ride with someone with a car who wants to earn money. Fundamentally, at its most basic level, that's what our platform does. That's our main business. We also have other business. We have a business that connects people that want to order food with restaurants that want to sell food and couriers that want to deliver it. A three-sided platform called Uber Eats. We also have a business that connects carriers that want to ship things and shippers that have empty space in the back of trucks called Uber Freight. That is a freight brokerage that more efficiently matches people that have empty space in trucks and people that want to ship things. And then we also have more nascent investments in self-driving technology to develop self-driving cars as well as a program called Uber Elevate, which is consolidating work done in flying cars, vertical takeoff and landing, electric propulsion, rotor aircraft, which is in its infancy, but also fun to talk about. So we operate in New York City as a TLC licensed black car base. We operate bases in the black car sector, the livery sector, and luxury limousine sector. We also dispatch trips to street hail livery, green cabs, which operate outside the yellow taxi zone in New York City. And we do millions of trips a week in the 5 boroughs. Our app connects people millions of times per week. Over half our trips in New York City begin outside Manhattan, excluding the airports. So take all airport trips out of the equation, and our trip total, more than half of trips start outside of Manhattan. If you look just at the Manhattan Central Business District, or CBD, it's almost 60% of trips start outside of the CBD. All of these impacts really weren't in the minds of the founders of this company when it was started 8 years ago. It was just a different way to get a car using your phone as the dispatch method. So through innovations in insurance and smartphone technology, this ride-sharing method really was able to take off. In New York State, outside the 5 boroughs, and in Connecticut and in New Jersey, we don't operate under this TLC black car livery model. We operate as what's called the Transportation Network Company, or TNC. So TNC which launched in New York State in around 4th of July 1 year ago, almost a year ago last week, operates under different methods where people use personal vehicles that, through innovations in insurance and ride sharing, turn into for-hire vehicles. So if you go to Nassau and Suffolk or Westchester or Putnam or Dutchess and upstate or in New Jersey, we do operate under a TNC model. We also have a livery business in New Jersey where we dispatch OL-plated vehicles. But the New York City business is really unique. Probably only London is a similar model. So when people refer, I think in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of the TLC, right now the app-based companies like Uber and Lyft and Via and Juno are indistinguishable from any other base. Just like a black car base like Elite or XYZ, or a livery base like Carmel or Dial 7. So that is a distinction. Sometimes people refer to the app-based companies as TNCs. In New York City, I don't like to refer to it in that way, because TNC is a legal structure that is for every county outside the 5 boroughs and other states. So it's a small point, but for this audience, I thought I might get into it. So one of the things about, and when Uber first started, it was taking pieces of the pie and reapportioning trips within it to use the app-based dispatch method. But then we've actually grown the pie, and we've grown the number of trips and grown the number of people that have access to this kind of transportation. This is a map of Paris. The light green dots represent the wait time, the time from when you request a trip in the app to when you receive it. And in the bottom right corner of the screen, I hope everyone online can see this too, it's ticking by year. So when Uber launched in Paris in 2013, we had under 16-minute wait time in lots of central Paris, and that's Paris CBD, and then even as we expanded, under 8 minutes. But then you see the service area in Paris expanded significantly to the outlying areas with low wait times. And even if you take a city like Los Angeles, which is very sprawling, not as dense, you see the same pattern. You have low ETAs in the outskirts of cities. And while Uber began in the central core of big cities in, like, let's say, Manhattan, Midtown, downtown Brooklyn, Greenpoint area, it's really spread much further beyond. And outside cities, Uber works very well in medium and even some low-density cities. If anyone has ever been, you can have affordable, reliable ride-sharing service even in a place that's medium density. Our rush hour is not the morning and evening rush. Our rush hour is often after midnight on weekends. This is a graph of Uber requests, and each colored line represents a different city. So we have Amsterdam, London, Paris, Stockholm, and Warsaw. And you can see trips spike around midnight on Friday night. Often when people are out, there's a correlation between drunk driving crashes and other, with anecdotal evidence, and police and drunk driving groups have said that, they attribute ride sharing as a great option to prevent drunk driving. Also, when you see charts like this, often the request period spikes as a sign when closing time. So from our data, we can see when bars close. And these are mostly European cities, but the trend is, is similar in other places. This is one of my favorite slides because each dot represents a point where a trip started in the 5 boroughs of New York City. The lighter, the white, is the more density of trips. And if you look in the upper right-hand corner, it ticks by the year. So this is 2012. You can see we started really just serving the Manhattan Central Business District, and then we kind of slowly spread into the periphery. As you go into 2015, look at, let's say, Upper Manhattan, Inwood area, South Bronx, Central Bronx, and then as it cycles through again, if you look down into areas of Central Brooklyn, areas that are not well served by mass transit, the airports light up very early on, but from that borough stat I gave earlier, we exclude those airport trips from the calculation, but it really spreads deep into Southeast Queens and then off into Nassau County. And these are areas that, many of which, not all, are underserved by mass transit and places that yellow taxis don't serve. And some green taxis do, and some green taxis do dispatch through the Uber app. A lot of those green taxi trips come when drivers are slow in the green cabs. They do turn on the Uber app. So I'll let this one cycle one more time so you can see some of this trip growth, because I really like this slide. I think it's really interesting. Places where the subway is not easily within walking distance, like Canarsie is a place where there's not a lot of access to transit, where people, and then using products like Uber Pool. If you're not familiar, Uber began as a single ride product, but we now have technology that can take similar people going the same route and put 2 people in one car, enabling us to lower the price. Lyft has a product similar called Lyft Line. Via is a company that really only does Uber Pool, where you can put more people in fewer cars. So this is something we've looked at a place like LaGuardia Airport, where a lot of passengers at LaGuardia come in on a vehicle with 4 wheels. And, if you put more people in fewer cars, you can increase capacity and throughput without making the pipe any bigger. So if you take mode from a bus or a subway, that's a net negative from a policy perspective. But if you take share from single use, that's much, much better. So one of the things we'll get in, something we see, we probably are taking some people off more efficient modes, but we're also putting people on those modes and serving as a really important first mile, last mile connector to transit. If you take a map of, let's say, Metro North, in Connecticut or New York or New Jersey Transit or PATH, and put a pin in a map every time an Uber trip starts, their station map lights up like a Christmas tree. And if you put another point where those trips are, it forks out where people are taking transit, taking Uber to and from transit. It's become a really important first mile, last mile solution. So speaking to that point, starting at the bottom, there's an APTA study that showed the more people use apps like Uber, the more likely they are to use other modes, such as bus, rail, walking, and bike share. And we get approached by a lot of carpool groups that need that kind of a backstop or fail-safe. A lot of people that want to bike to work need or want that reassurance that maybe one day if it's raining or if they have a suitcase for a trip, that they have an alternative that's going to be there affordably and reliably. So I keep coming back to those key words, affordable and reliable. So if you know that if you're in the outskirts of Paris and you're going to have a sub-8-minute wait time, you can plan on having that there. And maybe you don't need to own a car. That's one of the big things that we're seeing. The rate at which young people own cars is trending down nationwide, and that's something that people are paying close attention to. Also, a lot of families now that would ordinarily have 2 cars, not people living in a dense city with good transit like New York, but if you live in a suburban environment and you have 2 cars, because you don't need 2 cars every day, but maybe there are those times where both someone and their spouse need to have a vehicle. You can only have 1 car for out-of-town trips, and then take ride-sharing services like Uber for those other use cases. There's other studies, like this one from Pew, that car ownership does decline for people that use ride-sharing intensively, and particularly young people that come up with this as being the only thing that they know. Going from there, I'm going to transition to talking about some of our partnerships with transit agencies, and then move into our data sharing tool, Uber Movement, because I thought that might be a relevant thing to talk about with this group. Ways we partner with transit: we can fill in service gaps, we can provide access in areas that are underserved, we can curb demand for parking, and reduce costs. Those are the 4 ways that I'll talk through. This is a map that shows some of our transit partnerships with different agencies across the U.S. and around the world. They're all different to meet the needs of those agencies, and we've really experimented to find the best way to work with some of these agencies. Some have worked well, others haven't, but that's what's great about the experimentation. Summit, New Jersey is a commuter suburb that, like almost all, if anyone lives in a suburb with a regional rail parking lot in this region, the regional rail parking lots are full. There's waiting lists for parking spots. The city of Summit was faced with the need to build a parking garage for, millions of dollars. They would borrow money and float a bond to do it. So instead of doing that, the mayor had the idea, what if we put out an RFP and invite ride-sharing companies to take people to and from the commuter rail lot so the cars don't have to sit there all day waiting for the people to come home from work. And the city, using tax levy dollars, will subsidize those trips so that the out-of-pocket for the rider is only equal to what they would pay to sit in the parking lot. Very good idea. It's really interesting. So the first year, Uber won the RFP. The second year, Lyft is completing those trips. It's very early and it's experimental, but early results are encouraging, and that's an interesting idea to take the strain off some of those regional rail parking lots. Paratransit is another use case where cities that have to provide service through when their transit agencies are not accessible. So paratransit, like Access-a-Ride in New York or the RIDE program in Boston, are very expensive. It's not very good for riders. It's not very good for taxpayers. The trips are really expensive. The operators are not happy with the product. So something we're working on where we do complete trips for paratransit customers for the MBTA in Boston, as does Lyft. And it's something the Baker administration in Massachusetts is really excited about. And a trip that might require a 24-hour advance notice with a 2-hour pickup window and might cost the operator $40 to $50, we could do on demand for $10 to $15. So it's cheaper, it's better for the customer, and it's something we'd like to see more because it's better for the rider and it's better for the taxpayer. Pinellas County, Florida is a interesting one where they have a situation where they don't have the density that you have in big cities. They've partnered with Uber for a first mile, last mile partnership, but also you have in Pinellas County a lot of third shift restaurant food service workers who are often low income, people that are working in a restaurant till closing, like a waiter or a dishwasher, and don't have cars. And, the Pinellas County system is not efficient to run a bus with one person in it. And if your service is so infrequent in late nights, it may not make sense. What they found made sense for them was to have a program where you give Uber rides to these third shift workers, heavily subsidized or for free, up to 23 free rides per month, and let them get home safely in an Uber instead of figuring out some other kind of transit solution that didn't fit the need. Again, that's early, but also an interesting partnership. The newest one of those, Innisfil, Canada. The thing I'll mention, because smartphone penetration is high but not universal, that's an issue for public transit. I believe in Canada we've experimented with some kiosks where people could request rides from certain places within Innisfil. Because that's an issue, issues of the digital divide. Even though there is very high smartphone penetration, a lot of people don't use a smartphone, for example, like a senior who may not be as fluent with technology. In Cincinnati, we've entered into a partnership on how we can work better with the city of Cincinnati in a multifaceted way. I think we've struggled with ways that we can work with cities on things like data share and optimizing service, and we're trying to experiment to get it right on things we can do. We have an interest in sharing data. We share a lot of data in New York City with the Taxi and Limousine Commission. We're also protective of our data for business and confidentiality reasons and rider and driver policy. So, privacy, rider and driver privacy. So we try and strike a balance in that. We're trying to figure out exactly what it is. It's an active dialogue. Part of the reason why I'm here is to have conversations like this. That's part of what my job is. So in Cincinnati, we're working on a bunch of different initiatives, including managing the curb, which is a growing problem, and then the Uber movement tool, which I'm going to get into. But we hope if we take a holistic look in Cincinnati, we can learn things we can apply and export to other markets around the world. Has anyone ever heard of Uber movement? So this takes data that we have on zone-to-zone travel time and puts it out for historical use, sortable by time of day, day of week. So if you've ever used the Google API for travel time, that's only in real time. This is a little better in that you can access historical data and look and say, hey, what happened, when there's a fire downtown, or if, Uber, New York City is not yet a movement city, but if it was, we could say, hey, what happened when the Second Avenue subway line opened? What was travel time on surface streets around the Second Avenue subway for the 6 months prior to the Second Avenue subway opening to the 6 months after? Or, any other kind of unique event that might give you insight on an open data platform exportable to CSV. And these zone-to-zone travel times are only when we have a statistically significant data set do we release the data within movement, and those zone-to-zones, I believe, are abstracted to ZICTA. So right now, I believe the tool is public in movement cities: Boston, Washington, Sydney, Australia, Manila, Joburg, Paris, San Francisco, Bogota, and Cincinnati. So working with transit planners, a lot of MTOs, I believe, buy this data, and it's expensive. So one thing they could do, we give this away for free. And if an MTO was buying access to a data set, this is, something that's more, that can be a cost savings for them. So we take these data and then put them through the movement tool so cities can try and make more informed decisions. So you can go to movement.uber.com and check out this tool yourself. This is a screen cap of the movement tool in Paris, and you can see the way you can sort by time of day, day of week, through the different zones. We only populate a zone if we have enough data to make the reading accurate, and not so little that there's a privacy concern through re-identification, because that's a concern for ours, because we do feel we have an obligation to our riders and drivers to protect their privacy. And now moving on to rethinking parking. If anyone in this room does own a car, if you could pause and think, is anyone using it right now? You know, often, most of the time, cars are idle. They're very expensive assets. So once you have a 1,000-pound hunk of metal that you have to pay to, you know, purchase or lease, and then you have to insure it and maintain it and gas it up, and depending on where you can park it, you have to either garage it or leave it out somewhere. Once you incur those expenses, you're more likely to use the car. And the opportunity for ride-sharing services and other modes and things like bike share and dockless pedal assist bike share and scooters and all these other things is to reduce reliance on personal ownership of the vehicle. We've entered into a lot of partnerships with real estate developers. There's a lot of land use requirements that allow, if you develop a building, you are required to have off-street parking. And, you know, that's from a time when maybe everyone had to have a car, but maybe these land use and zoning rules requiring off-street parking aren't sending the right message in subsidizing parking now. And in fact, real estate developers are coming to Uber to say, hey, you know, we want to offer an amenity to our tenants that we can have a certain amount of Uber credits per month, and we have done deals like that. We also work with a commercial real estate developer in New Jersey that they will pay for rides to and from transit hubs. You know, if you want to commute to one of their office buildings, that's how they're marketing their commercial real estate to tenants, to have that tenant amenity to say, oh yeah, don't stress about driving to work, you know, take New Jersey Transit and you can Uber there. If you look at our most frequent destinations anywhere in this region, overwhelmingly they're transit hubs. They're bus stations, rail stops, any place you can get to another mode. That's the most frequent destination, followed by, you know, often you have bars and restaurants and healthcare, hospitals and dialysis centers and medical complexes. There's an overwhelming need for transportation in healthcare. In fact, the healthcare industry is really interested in Uber because of being able to get people to appointments. Missed appointments are a major cost driver in the healthcare space, because when you miss an appointment, that you have to, there's an administrative burden, and then that equipment is lying idle and it's not efficient. And it also drives costs. So if you're scheduled for dialysis for a few days a week and you regularly miss one of those appointments, you may be at increased risk of an ER visit, which is much more of a burden on the system. Also for clinical trials and other really precise experiments where you have to give someone an injection or a nurse has to make sure someone takes a pill, you know, a lot of clinical trial companies were using limo services at $50 to $60 a trip. You know, a trip that maybe Uber could do better for $10 to $20. So that's also another exciting use. One of the things we talked about on the slide about Cincinnati was use of the curb, and that's something where you see areas that become really congested with ride-sharing traffic, and thinking about maybe we have to reapportion how we use the curb. And this is something that I've heard come up a lot. It's something we're talking to the city of Washington, D.C. about. We've also talked about curb space pilots in Pittsburgh, in San Francisco, and other cities. So Washington, D.C. is experimenting with removing some parking spaces to create a rideshare pickup drop-off zone. And then using our technology, we can direct drivers in the app to those zones and say, hey, you know, don't make a drop-off in this congested area. We want you to go to this area with a dedicated drop-off, so that way, you know, the cars are not dwelling in traffic to make the pickup and drop-off. So again, this is also early, but also really interesting that if you could say, like 34th Street in Manhattan, where you have an SBS corridor, what if you said, hey, let's work with Uber, and let's turn off all pickup and drop-offs on 34th Street, so that, you know, it could happen, someone could coordinate with a rider-driver, but we push those pickups to 33rd and 35th towards the avenues so that the SBS bus feed could stay high. That would be really interesting. And in fact, that's what we've done on Market Street in San Francisco. There's no TNC pickups on Market Street because that's a big artery, and if you have a lot of people getting in and out of Uber, you know, that's not good for the flow of the surface trolleys and other cars that are trying to make their way through. So those are kind of, things that are very interesting. We've got to figure out the right way to do it, but that's something we're interested in. So just speaking about the pattern of car ownership, I think as people grow up in a place where ride sharing is native to them, the adoption is only going to grow, and that's, again, one of the reasons why it's important to speak at NYMTC. And then finally, I would say, if you think of a time, all the space that we dedicate to parking, if some of that could be converted to other uses. I know there are residential real estate developers that have put plumbing and other kind of infrastructure into the garages of units they're developing for a future time when maybe people don't own cars, maybe in the world where there's self-driving cars, where all that rentable space or that garage could be another bedroom or, be converted to another use. And you think of all the space we dedicate to parking and policy trade-offs we make, like how many parking spaces did we lose for the city bike share system? But think of the benefit and the millions of trips that are on that system with no emissions and the exercise benefit and the mobility benefit and the help to congestion. So what are those trade-offs we should make about other uses of the curb and parking? So there's a lot of, a lot of potential and a lot of things. And a lot of things to be wary of as well, and to be clear-eyed about. So with that, I'd be glad to take your questions.
Thank you, Jason. We'll start with the audience here. Anyone who's first?
Over here.
Oh, sorry.
Hi. You had said earlier that Uber users are more likely to use public transit, and then you had said that that's because throughout this whole thing, Uber is so affordable and reliable. But the Uber users that are using public transit are only using Uber then if it's an inconvenience. So they're using it in the bad weather and things like that. Are there any statistics that kind of show that surge pricing and how that could be affordable or reliable when you're waiting 15 minutes and paying $50 to go across town?
So a couple things in that question. So first of all, there's an APTA study that shows people that use ride-sharing services are more likely to use other modes. And there is a benefit to someone who maybe wants to commute by bike every day, but wants to have that backstop. So that exists, point number one. Point number two, we use dynamic pricing. So prices respond to supply and demand. The reason why you can't get a taxi at 4 o'clock or in the rain or when the concert gets out is because there's a fixed number of medallion taxis. There's like 13,000 of them. And the price is the same. There's a surcharge at night, and the city may experiment with dynamic pricing in taxi. But think about when you fly, it's more expensive to fly on Thanksgiving weekend than it is at another time. A hotel costs you more money when the convention's in town because of supply and demand. When demand exceeds supply, Uber automatically increases the price dynamically to send this incentive to more drivers to complete trips in that area because they'll earn more money and, honestly, have fewer people request rides because we find that price at which supply meets demand. It's basically like an auction. We're conducting an auction between people that want to complete a ride and people who are willing to pay for it. That's why, after the concert or in the rain, you can always get an Uber. And a lot of people choose not to pay that price. And people wait for surge pricing to go down. And actually, the objective of dynamic pricing is for dynamic pricing to be over. So it's actually not in Uber's interest is to have pricing be as reliable and stable as possible. But when demand conditions change, we want as many people to get a ride as possible. That's why we use the system. Riders, and there's parts of our platform that riders favor and that drivers do not. But again, the first thing I said is we match riders and drivers, and we take the maintenance of that platform really seriously because, you know, if riders stop riding or drivers stop supplying rides, then Uber wouldn't have a business. So there are those instances where dynamic pricing spikes, and the reason for that is demand for rides exceeds supply. And it's like they say, you know, the cure for high prices is high prices. So the solution to high prices, more people become interested in supplying that service, which naturally brings it down. And often, like what I do, if the price is really high, more than what I'm willing to pay, I wait a few minutes and it often comes in.
Okay. Another question in the back.
Hi. I was wondering if you could comment on the TLC proposal for a minimum wage for Uber and Lyft and app-based service drivers. And I understand Uber is concerned about this proposal. I was wondering, what do you see as motivating the proposal? And do you think you could, is it conceivable that Uber could actually come around to some version of the proposal?
Yeah, I think that, so the study that you're referencing, the TLC worked with two economists, I think one from the New School and one from Berkeley, two labor economists to conduct a very thorough study of driver earnings for New York City for-hire drivers, for really just app-based drivers. It's not taxi, livery, or any other drivers in the sector. And they came up with a proposal that is a time and distance formula with a utilization factor. It was really interesting, something we're looking at closely. And Uber's in-house economists talked to the study's authors throughout when they were producing it. And it's something that we're still digesting. I mean, our position is that we believe every full-time driver in New York City should make a living wage. And, you know, on the total revenue side, we see what drivers earn in their gross pay. We have less insight into their net, which is the really interesting thing about the study is what they did on driver expenses, because every driver's circumstances are different. So if you own a vehicle that's TLC plated and you conduct trips on it and it's very fuel efficient, that really changes your operating expenses significantly compared to, say, if you lease or rent a vehicle that's fuel inefficient. So if you're renting an SUV versus maybe you own a Camry hybrid that gets 41 miles per gallon highway in like 38 city, that's a much different expense profile, and that impacts your net earnings. So that's a long answer. The short answer is I don't have an immediate response to the study. We're still digesting it. The overall goal we share, you know, all drivers net of reasonable expenses that work full-time in New York City should make a living wage. And we think many do. How you get there is really important because you don't want unintended consequences. Because a lot of whenever you have a policy prescription, you could have an unintended consequence of that. But I think the utilization model is really interesting, and it's something we're still digesting.
So you mentioned a statistic that 10% of people, Uber users, are willing to give up their car, or they have given up their car. I was actually kind of surprised. I thought it would maybe a little bit higher. So my question to you is actually twofold. The first part is, are there any markets where it's like 30 to 40%? And what are those markets doing that markets are not doing? That's the first part.
I think it may be in questions like that. So the short answer is I don't know. I don't have that. That statistic was kind of taken from like a broader research report or survey data. So I think it's different in cities that have really good dense transit networks, like New York City. Car ownership is lower. You know, New York car is like a luxury. In other places, a car is a necessity because we have this really dense network. But it doesn't go to all corners of the city, and there's a lot of places around the city that are underserved by transit. So I think that statistic may be understated in places that have good access to transit. And we want to come up with ways to put more people on the system and serve as that, feeder in that first mile, last mile context.
Awesome. So that's the second part of the question is this idea of Uber as a platform. where it's a one-stop shop? Is that kind of where it's taking to kind of say, I no longer need to own a car because I have now, through my app, one way to, get to the train station, from the train station, on the train, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, so the Jump Bikes, which is a Brooklyn-based e-bike company that Uber acquired, they have a pilot operating in San Francisco where average trip length on the system has been over 2 miles. And the trips per bike per day have been very high. So 2 miles, so that's a distance that covers a lot of UberX trips. So we think, the dockless bike share could replace, in a lot of use cases, the Uber trip. So that's a really interesting phenomenon. And Uber's a platform, exactly, that Uber's investing heavily through the Jump Bike acquisition and investment in the scooter company Lime, and then an integration with the company Wasabi, which is a ticketing agency that does a lot of the back end of ticketing for a lot of agencies. So what if you could go exactly first mile, and then transit ticket, and then last mile, maybe you take your car to the train station, an Uber pool, and then you ride on rail through a Wasabi train ticket integration, and then maybe you can complete the segment on e-scooter, or a pedal assist bicycle to get the rest of the way where you're going. And that is where Uber is investing, to be much more multimodal.
Hi, great presentation, by the way. Quick question about the different dynamics within cities versus the sort of interplay between suburban areas and cities. There's a huge population of people who commute to New York City, for example, and a lot of times in places that are pretty close by, they're not really good, reliable ways of getting here. And even Uber, in some instances, if you look at the pricing, it's actually not that economic for the distance and time. For example, when you cross a bridge, it's $15 toll, so that gets sort of incorporated. And just taking this into account, can you just sort of describe briefly the different sort of challenges that you think or Uber or Lyft are facing when operating between these suburban areas versus cities?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing but different. We face different problems. If you think about this region, the transit system is designed to bring people from the periphery of the system into the central core to go to work and then go home at the end of the day. And that out from the periphery into the center and back again doesn't meet a lot of the use cases now, because a lot of people, there now are big commercial districts in the boroughs. It's much more common to live and work in your home borough, and through rezonings and other changes to land use, there's more job growth and commercial activity in other places, both in suburban areas, but also you look at downtown Brooklyn or Greenpoint, Williamsburg area, and people are using alternative services to make those to get to and from work because the system doesn't provide for that. So we operate our business similarly in a suburban, or pricing is different depending on the city. So I'm not sure if this is a great answer to the question, but thinking about the L train shutdown, something we're thinking about a lot. There's not, cars with 4 wheels cannot replace the capacity of the L. It's just not possible, and the load that we put on the roads is too great. But what if, we had a program using Uber Pool and other shared rides to bring a lot of that load to the G train or other, or maybe to the ferry network or something. So those are the kind of solutions where we could be helpful in trying to replace some of that capacity we're going to lose for the L train.
Good afternoon, Julian. So earlier you mentioned in DC that you're regulating curbside pickup and drop-off zones. So I was just wondering if you have any plans, does Uber have any plans to partner with the New York City Department of Transportation to regulate curbside and pickup and drop-off zones in New York City itself?
Yeah, I think that's something a conversation we'd be interested in having, because I think management of the curb comes up as an issue. You know, we work with airports a lot on how we can use the curb more efficiently, and it's a conversation that we'd like to have with DOT.
Hi, some data question. Do you have any information on the average yearly income of your total aggregate of Uber users, as opposed to the mean, or as opposed to, in other words, is the service only for people of a certain income?
Of the riders or the drivers?
The riders. In other words, the pool of people who use Uber. Do you have any information on what their yearly income is in terms of brackets? Because you have 8.5 million people, and there's a certain kind of class of, certain people can't afford to use Uber.
You have the Uber app?
No.
You should download it and price out some trips and look at Uber Pool, because it's surprisingly affordable. So we have a rush hour. We have a surge demand pattern in underserved areas like Central Brooklyn, where, the service in certain times, especially Uber Pool, is very affordable. So the answer is, I don't know on income brackets, but here's what I'll tell you. There are millions of people using Uber in New York City every month. So those millions of New Yorkers, not people from out of town, there's 8.4 million people that live in New York City, and income is like a pyramid, So there's very few people at the top, and then the base of the pyramid gets wider. I don't know the exact slope of the size of the pyramid, but think about if the whole pyramid is 8.4 million, and we have millions of riders, let's say 2 million plus, that's taking in a big amount of the population. One of my favorite pieces that I've read since I worked at Uber is something Uber had nothing to do with. There was a university president outside Atlanta who, during the summer, signed up to be an Uber driver. A lot of elected officials and other kind of people who want to get the pulse of their community signed up to be drivers. And I've been a driver and done trips in New Jersey and Westchester, and it's really interesting. By the way, overwhelmingly, my trips are taking people of all incomes to the train. Metro North runs was my most frequent trip that I've done. But this college university president in Atlanta, or outside Atlanta, hoped to take the pulse of his community, his student body, but overwhelmingly, his riders were low-income people going to MARTA, which is the Atlanta Mass Transit Network. So I guess I would encourage you to download the app to check it out.
Well, I was just asking about whether you have any data on the average income of an average.
No, I don't.
Okay.
Hi. So I have two questions. One was on Uber movement and when you expect that to come to New York City. And the second was when you're looking at the different partnerships that you've been able to strike up with different transit agencies, from the back end perspective, I feel like there's a number of hurdles that would have to be overcome in terms of payment, if you're going to be splitting the payment between the riders and the city, if you're going to have ADA accessible vehicles like you have in Boston, if you're trying to geofence and only have people be able to take the, rides in a certain area. So are you helping cities try to figure out some of those data concerns and issues, and what sort of structures already need to be in place for a partnership to be successful?
It's a very good question. So we have great technology tools, so we can, if you say we want to provide a discount on a trip that ends at a transit hub, we can do that. If the trip has to end within a 10th of a mile of this, or, if you have that dialysis appointment, we'll give you a coupon that will give you a free trip to that place, and we can restrict it by time of day of week, and start point, end point, or any trip that begins within Summit, New Jersey, and ends at the train station only with riders who signed up for that promotion. We can do that very easily, technologically. That's the good news. The bad news is it is hard to get through procurement issues, and I think we can be hard to, enter into a procurement with. And cities can sue. And I used to work a lot with the City Mayor's Office of Contract Services when I worked in government, and I learned about our procurement system and, you know, all the different components of it. There's a lot of steps in the process that are designed to make sure that there's, you know, the system is designed for integrity of vendor and no waste or abuse. It's not designed to actually procure the best service. You know, the point of procurement is so that there's no kind of, you know, organized crime link and there's no kind of favoritism or anything. The goal isn't always, you know, what is the best thing, because the machine was not built for that. And I'm also saying we're, so when an entity like a government agency and then a younger tech company like Uber try to enter into a procurement, the details can be hard, and we, you know, work very, very hard to push through them, but that is an issue. And it's slowing. We have to come up with, you know, I'm envious of Waze has a two-way data share agreement, and they have a term sheet or a contract on their website. You can print it out and sign it, and you can return it or not. And, you know, the service that Uber provides, we don't have that. There's a ton of issues around, you know, if a government agency is paying for a trip, then, you know, how do they access those trip data? And around wheelchair accessibility, where, you know, we operate wheelchair accessible vehicles in New York City and in other places, but we're launching a pilot soon as part of the new TLC pilot that actually is going to become a rule, adding a new service requirement for wheelchair accessible vehicles. So that's the long answer. The short answer is there's a ton of sticky things to work through, but it's worth doing, because when we have those agreements, like in Innisfil, Canada, it's really, really valuable. But think about, you know, paratransit. If we could have, if all paratransit could be on demand, you know, for ride-sharing prices and have, you know, service quality for wheelchair accessible vehicles, that'd be amazing.
Thank you for your talk, which is, you know, very interesting. You mentioned a couple of things during your talk that I think are interacting in ways that you didn't sort of explain. In particular, you mentioned Uber's and other transportation network companies' annual role in providing a last-mile solution to people interested in taking public transit. And that seems very admirable and socially desirable because it promotes public transit, it reduces the you know, need for individual automobiles. You also mentioned, sort of enhancing the possibility of increased possibility of automated vehicles that just drive in an automated fashion and don't require a driver. Seems to me that these two things are on a collision course, and that the idea that Uber is going to remain, or transportation network companies like Uber are going to remain a last mile kind of solution is based on the idea, you know, the price points of the different things. So if you want to get to a train station, then you can get a ride into the, you know, city from the suburbs or whatever. Uber costs a certain amount to get to the train station and then takes a certain amount of money to get to the city. It wouldn't be efficient to just remain on that Uber car to get into the city. But when the vehicles are automated, most of what you're paying for in that Uber fare is the driver. Once the driver is out of that car, the price drops down substantially just because of that. And, you know, it could drop down further because the cost of the vehicle is going to be cheaper if it doesn't need the safety equipment necessary to account for a human driver. So these two things are on a collision course. So right now, Uber may be playing an admirable social role, socially desirable role in the last mile problem, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it's going to be something different. It seems, a lot of observers think, myself included, that the price of these rides is going to come down to a price that's way below, significantly below even public transportation costs, and it's no longer going to make price sense for users to get off that Uber and get onto public transportation. Uber's just going to replace public transportation, going to result in a tremendous amount of congestion. And so it seems to me, or it seems to a lot of people, that the only solution to this is for government to step in now and create some limit on the growth of the transportation network companies. I'm very curious to hear if you have an argument why that's not the case and why the government shouldn't do that.
That's a great question. I didn't go so deep on self-driving because that technology is very nascent, so it's not here, you know, or it's here in only very limited uses, but it is in a long-term time horizon, it's absolutely a huge deal. So the scenario you described, whether it ends up being a good or bad outcome, is entirely up to us in this room. And I don't mean us on this side of the lectern, the Uber side, I mean both sides. And it's honestly why I am here. Bruce Schaller has a presentation on this exact question called the Big Discussion or something like that. It's on his website if you want to look at it. I think it's really well done. And basically, you could have a good outcome where self-driving cars are acting as a feeder to transit or in high capacity, you know, maybe dynamic self-driving bus, you know, more efficient bus pickups or whatever. Or you could say everyone who has a self-driving Tesla can self-drive to work and then it'll circle all day, you know, adding BMT with no one in it because they don't want to find a parking space. That would be horrible. Or, you know, you could have low-density development and sprawl because, you know, you don't have to drive anymore. You could sit in your self-driving pod and, you know, look at your phone or whatever. So that would be a really bad outcome. It's not clear which one it's going to be, but there has to be a conversation with people developing the technology and government and, you know, use of the roads, because the more aligned we are, the more we talk about it, the better the outcome will be. Uber does not want the bad outcome at all. What it will be is really up to us in this room. So your question is fantastic. The two trends are dissonant. You know, they're adverse, what I said first, and kind of this potential future. What future we have, that's where I disagree with you. You kind of seem resigned that once cost per mile on self-driving goes way low, that it's just going to be a nightmare. I don't believe that. I think it could be, but it's up to us if it is.
We have some more questions that we got to take. Some really great questions. We have, I believe, some online questions.
Yes, we have a few online questions. So this one is, can we hear more about Uber's position on congestion pricing, potential partnerships? How can congestion pricing support ride-hailing?
Yes. So Uber supports congestion pricing. You know, use of the roads, there's more demand for streets in New York City than there is supply of it. You know, the true cost of riding, you don't bear the true cost of driving your car down the street in New York City. And we think the most efficient way to allocate the scarce resource is to price it. And that's road pricing, you know, more broadly, in New York City congestion pricing. We've been a member supporter of Move NY for 2.5 years or more. And then this last push for congestion pricing, we were enthusiastic supporters for it. We went to Albany to lobby for it. We put up a TV ad in support of it. So we're sincerely behind it. And our cars are part of that. So, you know, Uber does not like congestion because when the Uber cars are stuck in traffic, those are riders and drivers that aren't getting anywhere. It's making our service less efficient. So Uber cars add to BMT, as do every other use, you know, delivery cars, personal vehicles, you know, government cars with placards that have free parking, free street parking, reduce lane miles through, you know, policy choices we made, like pedestrian plazas and protected bike lanes. Protected bike lanes are great, and they represent a policy choice about reducing lane miles for vehicles. So when you reduce lane miles, traffic speeds can slow. That's a real thing. As is adding, if you add a lot of FHVs because you have a good mouse, like if you've built a better mousetrap and more people use it and you add more FHVs, you know, that's adding to BMT. So we have to allocate a scarce resource. So we support pricing it and have really kind of walked the walk on that support.
And another question is, how are some of the ways Uber can partner with local authorities, example DOT, in order to contribute towards the improvement or upkeep of infrastructure used directly or indirectly?
I don't know. I mean, how could we do that? You know, we'd like to. We have met with DOTs, and there's a big, I think, a NACTO or a NASTO meeting in a couple of weeks where we're presenting a similar presentation to this one. So we try to get around to NACTO and NASTO meetings, and we send a big delegation of people to TRB. We have this core group of planners and economist types that work out of our headquarters to try and, keep up on these issues, because we haven't always been, we've been keeping up with our own growth, and only now we're kind of becoming more aware of our role. As we grow in size, our responsibility grows too. So I don't have a specific answer to that, but it's something we would like to do.
In transit partnerships like the Summit, New Jersey example, how will Uber prevent a potential increase in congestion caused by an influx of cars serving those first and last mile rider communities?
Well, assume for the purposes of that statement, all other things being equal, the number of train riders is equal. The number of trips is the same, right? Because the car has to go, you have to get to the train station anyway. So if we're displacing a personal vehicle trip, the congestion is equal. If we're displacing a walker or a bicyclist or something, congestion would increase. And if we are replacing personal vehicle trips with an Uber pool trip, congestion would decrease.
Okay, thank you. I'm pretty sure there's probably another one question or two questions out there. We'll take two more questions.
Sorry, somebody was ahead of me. I have a question about the environmental impact. We've seen that out in Manhattan, I work in Manhattan, and all of a sudden with Uber and Lyft, we have all these cars now. Have you done any studies about your emission? Because your model is based on putting more cars on the road. So what about the emissions, and what about our environment? And is Uber at all concerned about that?
Yes. So we have electric vehicle pilots in 7 cities. We have very, very, very few EVs on the road in New York City. It's something we've met with NYSERDA about. In London, we offered a vehicle scrappage incentive where we would pay you thousands of pounds if you scrap your combustion engine vehicle on the Uber platform and replace it with an electric vehicle on the platform. Then we looked at charging infrastructure and other things. So to the extent that Uber and shared rides like Uber Pool reduce reliance on personal ownership of the vehicle, that's emissions net positive. To the extent we don't, it's an emissions net negative. To the extent that we can increase EV adoption through incentives like the one I discussed in London or other ones in other cities, that's net positive. I'm looking to him to ask the questions in like this awkward head concern moment.
Very interesting presentation, Mr. Host. So I was curious if Uber conducts a survey of your users, the riders, in terms of their travel pattern. For example, what percentage of them are like frequent users and use Uber every day for commuting? And also, what's the trip purpose of their Uber rides? Thank you.
I think that I don't want to get too into the demand pattern, but there's a lot of use cases. There's, a lot of our trips, so there's commuting use cases, there's people that go out at night, there's, I think they call them open jaw trips where you, Uber one way but not back, which makes us think you might use transit, I know people that live outside the city or outside Manhattan, and maybe they'll take the train in and go to dinner, see a show, and then Uber home, because they don't want to take transit late at night when service is less frequent or they feel a safety issue or something like that. So that's a great use case for half the trip, So I think the last time, I don't remember the data exactly, but something like a third of trips are open jaw like that, and then we have a lot of round trip, but commuting is a big use case. Healthcare, most frequent destinations are transit, healthcare, bars and restaurants.
Two more questions,
So at the beginning, you talked about the different companies or whatever within Uber, and one that you mentioned was Uber Eats. And so I know that Uber Rush was folded into that a few months back. So I'm just curious if you could speak to anything that's going on with that right now, just as a different topic.
Yeah, Uber Rush was a courier platform that connected people to couriers for, it was a very useful thing for a lot of people. We ended up bringing it into Uber Eats because it was a little bit orphaned and didn't have that engineering support, and I think the team that ran that business made the decision to fold it into Uber Eats. But Uber Eats has been kind of a surprise in that it's growing significantly. There's a really good jerk chicken restaurant in Brooklyn that has, built another kitchen really to service the delivery demand. So the good thing about Uber Eats is if you go on Seamless, you are basically loading your menu on their platform, but you still supply the courier. The Uber value proposition is that from a restaurant owner perspective, you are getting incremental revenue without taking up a seat in your restaurant, and we are supplying that eater to you. So you don't have that lead gen cost. So we're bringing you eaters, and we're bringing you couriers, and you're paying us part of the ticket, part of the cost of the meal is going to us, but that's incremental revenue that you wouldn't have otherwise had to defray your fixed costs. So, you're paying your variable costs of your food inputs. So depending on what your menu items are and what your margins look like, it could make a lot of sense to the restaurant owner. This is a new thing I learned about, but New York City has a lot of delivery food, so in other places, other cities that don't have a culture of delivery, it's much more interesting in those places. One last question. You've been very patient, sir.
Thank you, and I think there's a group of people who will come to work, like in New York anyway, and they drive to work, and they park in a parking garage, and they have empty available seats in their car. So what do you think about these group of people? Because these group of people, they can provide rides, but they don't increase the congestion of the city. And I heard Uber has Uber commute before, yeah. And so what do you think about these? What's your opinion?
Yeah, I think commute products are really interesting. This is basically, if you're going somewhere, you can turn on an app as not as a for-hire driver, just as a regular motorist, and bring someone in the car with you in exchange for the IRS reimbursement rate. So if you're getting that IRS rate, it's what, 58 cents a mile or something, or 55 cents a mile, then you don't have to pay tax on it. It's not like a commercial transaction. So it's a much lighter experience, and it doesn't defray the full cost, but it does a little bit. We tried it in Washington, D.C., and it didn't catch on, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't in another iteration. Waze has this product. I think they do it in San Francisco. I don't know if they do it other places, but I think that's really interesting. It's not as good probably for New York City, which has dense transit, but in other places that have a lot of people commuting by car, I think it's great. If you put more people in fewer cars, you can increase throughput without increasing the size of the pipe. And that's kind of what it's all about, using what you have more efficiently and getting more people in fewer cars. I think it's lovely. Not something we've ever done in the Northeast U.S., but Waze does it, and Uber did it in Washington, D.C.
Okay, well, again, thank you very much for your participation. And Jason, great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.